Ancient rock art can reach out to us today, representing the actions and ideas of real people who lived in the past, yet speaking to us through incomplete fragments that we cannot comprehend or translate in their entirety. One example of a rock art cave is in Guam, at the famous Star Cave of Ritidian or Lipekzen, sometimes known as the Ritidian Pictograph Cave. Several caves are distributed through the limestone cliffs here, including many bearing evidence of variable scopes of past activities, such as temporary camps, ritual or ceremonial venues, burial practice, and rock art. In this setting, the Ritidian Pictograph Cave, or Star Cave, contains the most abundant and diverse rock art. Painted rock art elements, or pictographs, were made with different colors or recipes, forms of their motifs, and positioning within the light, twilight, and dark zones of the cave. The white stick figure elements sometimes were placed over the handprints or other red motifs, thereby showing at least some degree of change through time. The red elements must have been older, and then the white elements were drawn later, literally overprinting the red elements and signifying a change in the context of what people were doing in this cave. In a larger perspective, the white stick figures have been by far the most popular of the pictographs in numerous caves at Ritidian as well as throughout Guam and the Mariana Islands. In fact, in most pictograph caves, the only rock art elements are the white stick figures, and the only archaeological layers are dated within the last 1,000 years, and linked to the written and unwritten histories of the traditional Lati period of the Mariana Islands, overlapping with the early Spanish influence following Magellan's visit in the year 1521. Given this larger context, the caves at Ritidian offer an extremely rare opportunity to learn about ancient caves and rock art, beyond the limitations of looking only at the white stick figures dated within the last 1,000 years. In particular, the caves at Ritidian have shown different forms of rock art, and they have shown significantly older archaeological layers with evidence of substantial change through a long time scale. The Ritidian Pictograph Cave, or Star Cave, happens to be one of the very few caves in the region bearing multiple archaeological layers, dating back to 3,500 years ago, at the time when people first ever lived in the remote islands of Pacific Oceania. So far, all of these oldest known caves happen to be at Ritidian, including the Star Cave with the most rock art, the first cave with limited black line pictographs, and two other smaller caves that apparently were temporary campsites. Additionally, one area was the residential habitation at 3,500 years ago, acting as the home base for the people who accessed into the caves for various purposes apart from the everyday living at the residential habitation area. Several more residential sites and cave sites were dated to the later time periods. All of these earliest sites were situated along the edge of the ancient shoreline during a time when the sea level was slightly higher than today and before the coastal sediments accumulated in thick layers of the coastal plain that we all can see today. The residential habitation area was positioned over the shallow lagoon water, apparently involving post-raised houses over the water, consistent with the usual pattern of the oldest habitation sites in this region. The first cave contained pools of fresh water floating just above the higher sea level of this early time. Outside the cave, people left dense deposits of food middens and several highly specialized and finely decorated objects of pottery, shell ornaments, and other exquisite and extremely rare or unique items reflecting ritual or ceremonial events that were not represented at the ordinary residential habitation. Inside the cave, people created black line pictographs representing contorted human figures and other unknown motifs, potentially but not necessarily dating back to the first cultural layer here at 3,500 years ago. The two smaller campsite caves showed limited food remains and sparse concentrations of broken pottery and other artifacts. These two caves showed no rock art. The pictograph cave, or star cave, was at the edge of the ancient shoreline. Here, people accessed a protected overhang area at the exterior, and certainly they would have explored into the interior areas. At the exterior overhang area, the archaeological layers showed unusual kinds of shellfish food remains that ordinarily are not found at habitation sites. Other food remains included the bones of fish, birds, and turtles. The artifacts included plain red slipped pottery, stone and shell tools and related debris, and burned pieces of corals and red ochre. Notably, none of the findings represented the highly specialized and ornately decorated pottery, shell ornaments, and other exquisite items as found at the Ritidian first cave. Instead, the findings at the Star Cave all were utilitarian or practical, except for the unusual kind of shellfish foods. One unique finding, though, involved the broken pieces of an earthenware bowl showing the impressions of wrapped vines, cordage, or possibly rattan, so far known only in this one instance. Inside the Star Cave, the archaeological layers showed no sign of ancient activity except for burial practice during a much later time period. Otherwise, the ancient cultural evidence here includes the plentiful rock art. The pigment colors and recipes, the represented forms or motifs, and the positions within the cave in total represent at least a few different categories of the pictographs, reflecting separate cultural purposes and time periods. Direct dating of the pictographs has not yet been attempted because this approach would be destructive. First, for identifying the material composition of the rock art pigments and binding agents, and then second, for measuring the radiocarbon or other age of a specific material component. The black line figures represent unknown motifs. Other black-line pictographs at the first cave include some contorted human figures and other unclear motifs. In both the first cave and the Star Cave, the black-line pictographs were created in the dark zones, requiring artificial light. They were in substantially elevated positions in the first cave and in slightly elevated positions in the Star Cave. The black color material appears to include charcoal, as you might expect, but the charcoal probably was mixed in a recipe with something else, as a sticky substance or binding agent that could hold the mixture together and ensure that it would adhere to the rocky surface of the cave. The red handprints probably are the most striking and memorable parts of the rock art for most people. A few of the handprints are visible along the central cave pillar formation that everyone can see right away when entering into the cave. After looking for a little while, you may notice that some of the handprints were overlain by the later white stick figures. The red handprints were made of red ochre or similar substance, combined with an unknown binding agent. The color is reminiscent of the red slip found on the earliest pottery of the Mariana Islands and continuing for the next 1,000 years. Additionally, nodules of red ochre have been found in the earliest archaeological layers. Some of the handprints were on the cave ceiling, probably created by someone standing on the rocky protrusion in the floor here and reaching upward. Nearly all of the handprints are of the left hand of a person. More than one person could be represented. The sizes are consistent with teenagers and probably teenage girls, but these aspects are inconclusive for now. In a worldwide perspective, the handprints at Ritidian are unusual. In other geographic regions of the world, people created hand stencils, made by spraying a pigment over the hand and resulting in a negative space of the hand as a hand stencil. At the Star Cave and elsewhere at Ritidian in Guam, people created full hand prints in the red color, pressing a painted hand against the rock surface. In addition to the handprints, the same or similar red color recipe was used for creating motifs that could be line-drawn hands or other designs, as well as a circle and a few other motifs. One unique creation was a six-pointed star shape, currently obscured partially by the water and minerals dripping down the cave wall. At a later time, some of the handprints and other red motifs became overlain by the white stick figures. The white stick figures are the most popular pictographs in Guam and the Mariana Islands. Generally, they have been associated with caves where the only archaeological deposits have been dated within the traditional Lati period of approximately 1,000 through about 300 years ago. This later time range would be consistent with how the white stick figures overlay some of the red motifs at the Ritidian Star Cave. The white stick figures represent people with or without heads and with many variations in how they are posed. Rarely, the figures could represent turtles or other animals or unclear shapes. So far, every instance of the white stick figures has been found in a light or twilight area of a cave. The white color was made with the calcium carbonate of slaked lime, such as when burning pieces of shells and corals. This substance was known during ancient times when people created the white lime infilling in their pottery, and when they used the slaked lime as part of the ingredients when chewing on betel nut quids. For the rock art, however, people must have added a sticky binding agent, possibly using the sap of breadfruit that happens to be white color and effective as an adhesive in the canoe-making traditions. Another recipe was used for a reddish-brown form of rock art. The designs included some unknown shapes. One area of a congregation of squares or rectangles, a possibly barbed spear or harpoon, an apparent crab shape, and a few clusters of tiny dots made of thumbprints or fingerprints. One cluster of the dots has been celebrated as a kind of star chart, leading to the popular name of the Star Cave. The idea was hypothesized in 1999 by the astronomer Rosina Iping, specifically noting that the numbers of dots could represent a 16-month calendar associated with navigation and wayfinding traditions. In a global perspective, lines of dots are popular in both painted pictographs and carved petroglyphs. Usually they are interpreted as measuring, tracking, or accounting for something. A star chart would be consistent with this general understanding. A few separate clusters of dots are concentrated all in one portion of the cave. In the most famous cluster, some of the dots extend up the cave wall and meet with a horizontal line along the edge of the ceiling. The other clusters are entirely on the ceiling of the cave. Rock art always is difficult to interpret because people created these designs long ago, and today we cannot know exactly what those people were thinking or what the rock art meant to them during their lifetimes. In the case of the Star Cave at Ritidian, we can discern at least a few categories of the rock art, according to the differences in the colors and recipes, the design forms and motifs, and the positioning in the cave. At least two separate time periods certainly are represented, and probably 3 or possibly 4 time periods can be speculated. Likewise, significant chronological change has been documented in the forms and styles of the pottery and other artifacts, in the compositions of the food middens, in the placement and forms of residential housing, and in the physical shapes of the landforms and ecological zones. Given all of this information, what are your thoughts about the Ritidian pictograph cave or star cave in Guam? What aspects would you like to explore more? As always, thank you for watching. I will see you in the next video.